The Bible and other historical documents suggest that Jesus spent the majority of his life in the region of Palestine and was crucified by the Romans in Jerusalem. However, there are some legends and theories that suggest Jesus may have traveled to India or the surrounding areas at some point in his life. One such theory is that Jesus may have traveled to India during his lost years, the period between his childhood and the start of his ministry as recorded in the Bible. Some people believe that during this time, Jesus may have traveled to India to study under Hindu or Buddhist teachers, and that this influenced his teachings when he returned to Palestine. However, there is no concrete evidence to support this theory, and it remains a matter of speculation and debate among scholars and historians. The lost years of Jesus refer to the period of his life between his childhood and the beginning of his public ministry as recorded in the Bible. The Bible does not provide much information about this time, and as a result, there has been a lot of speculation and curiosity about what Jesus may have been doing during these years. There are a number of legends and theories about what Jesus did during his lost years, but none of them have been confirmed by historical evidence. Some theories suggest that Jesus traveled to India or other parts of Asia to study religion and philosophy, while others suggest that he spent time with the Essenes, a Jewish sect known for their ascetic lifestyle and mystical beliefs. There are also some accounts that suggest Jesus may have traveled to Egypt, where he could have studied with the Gnostics or other spiritual groups. However, these accounts are largely based on speculation and have not been substantiated by historical evidence. The Rosa Ball, also known as the Tomb of Jesus, is a shrine located in Srinagar, the capital of the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir. According to local legend, the shrine contains the tomb of Jesus, who is said to have traveled to Kashmir during his lost years and lived there until his death. The Rosa Ball is a small building that contains a stone sarcophagus that is said to hold the remains of Jesus. The shrine is maintained by a local Muslim family who claim to have been its custodians for over 600 years. According to the family, the shrine was built by a saint named Yazasaf, who they believe was actually Jesus in disguise. However, there is no historical evidence to support the claim that Jesus visited Kashmir, and the origins of the Rosa Ball are shrouded in mystery. Some scholars believe that the shrine may have been built by Persian or Central Asian traders who brought Islam to the region in the 14th century. Others argue that it may have been built by local Kashmiri Muslims who were influenced by Sufi mysticism. While some people believe that the shrine may contain the remains of Jesus, but there is no conclusive evidence to support this claim. The book, The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ, is a controversial text that was supposedly written by a Russian journalist named Nicholas Notovich in the late 19th century. The book claims that Jesus traveled to India during his lost years and spent time studying with Hindu and Buddhist teachers, and that this experience influenced his later teachings when he returned to Palestine. According to Notovich's account, he was traveling through India when he suffered a broken leg and was forced to stay in a Buddhist monastery in Ladakh, in the Himalayas. While he was there, he was shown a manuscript that purportedly described the life of Saint Isa, a holy man who was said to have visited India during the same time period as Jesus. The manuscript, which was supposedly written in Pali, described how Saint Isa studied with Hindu and Buddhist teachers and preached to local people, and it claimed that he was actually Jesus, who had survived the crucifixion and traveled to India to continue his spiritual journey. Yogananda Paramahansa was an Indian yogi and spiritual teacher who founded the Self-Realization Fellowship, an organization that promotes the teachings of yoga and meditation. In his book Autobiography of a Yogi, Yogananda Paramahansa claims that Jesus traveled to India during his lost years and studied with Hindu and Buddhist teachers. According to Yogananda Paramahansa's account, Jesus traveled to India at the age of 14 and spent the next several years studying yoga and meditation with various spiritual teachers. He also claims that Jesus traveled to other parts of India, including the Himalayas, where he continued his spiritual quest. Yogananda Paramahansa's book on Jesus Christ is called The Second Coming of Christ, The Resurrection of the Christ Within You. It is a 2-volume set that presents Yogananda's interpretation of the teachings of Jesus Christ, as well as his own spiritual insights and experiences as a yogi and teacher. In the book, Yogananda argues that Jesus Christ was not just a historical figure, but also a spiritual presence that can be experienced within oneself through meditation and spiritual practice. He presents Jesus as a great spiritual teacher who taught the importance of love, compassion, and self-realization. He also discusses the idea of Christ consciousness, which he defines as a state of spiritual awakening in which one realizes the divine nature within oneself and in all of creation. He argues that this state of consciousness is not limited to Christianity, but can be found in all spiritual traditions. According to Yogananda's account, Jesus spent the several years studying with various spiritual teachers, including Hindu and Buddhist masters. He claims that Jesus learned the science of yoga and meditation during his time in India, and that these teachings influenced his later ministry in the Middle East. The book Yogananda also suggests that Jesus may have visited other parts of India, including the Himalayas, where he continued his spiritual quest. He argues that Jesus' experiences in India helped to shape his spiritual teachings and his understanding of the divine. He presents his interpretation of Jesus as a spiritual teacher who embodied the principles of yoga. He suggests that Jesus was a yogi in the truest sense of the word, meaning that he was someone who had attained a state of union with the divine through spiritual practice and self-realization. According to Yogananda, Jesus' teachings reflect many of the principles of yoga, such as the importance of meditation, the practice of non-attachment, and the development of spiritual awareness. He suggests that Jesus was not only a spiritual master, but also a yogavatar, or an embodiment of the divine principles of yoga. He also argues that Jesus' teachings were not limited to a particular religious tradition, but were universal in nature. He suggests that Jesus' message was one of love, compassion, and self-realization, and that these principles can be found in all spiritual traditions. Paramahansa Yogananda and his followers have suggested that Jesus practiced a form of yoga that was similar to Kriya Yoga. They argue that Jesus may have learned the principles of yoga during his visit to India, and that he incorporated these teachings into his own spiritual practice and teachings. According to them, the teachings of Kriya Yoga were known and practiced in India for thousands of years, and were passed down through a lineage of spiritual masters. He suggests that Jesus may have learned these teachings during his time in India, and that he incorporated them into his own spiritual practice. Elizabeth Clare Prophet's book, The Lost Years of Jesus, documentary evidence of Jesus' 17-year journey to the East, suggests that Jesus traveled to India during the lost years of his life, and that he may have learned spiritual practices from Hindu and Buddhist teachers. In the book, Prophet draws on a variety of sources to support her claims, including ancient texts and legends, as well as more modern accounts of spiritual seekers who have traveled to India and Tibet. She argues that Jesus may have studied with Indian yogis and Buddhist monks, and that he may have learned techniques such as meditation and pranayama, which is a breathing exercises, that would later be associated with yogic and Buddhist traditions. Some of the sources she uses to support her claims include a number of ancient texts and legends that suggest Jesus may have traveled to India, including the Acts of Thomas, a 3rd century text that describes the Apostle Thomas traveling to India and meeting a king who converts to Christianity, and the Bhavishya Purana, a Hindu text that contains a prophecy about a holy man named Ishaputra who will come from the West and teach spiritual truths. Prophet also cites the accounts of modern spiritual seekers who have traveled to India and Tibet and reported experiences that they believe are related to Jesus. For example, she quotes the yogi Paramahansa Yogananda and the Russian writer Nicholas Roerich, who claim to have seen a painting of Jesus in a Tibetan monastery. Finally, Prophet draws on her own knowledge of spiritual teachings and practices to support her claims about Jesus' visit to India. She argues that many of the teachings and practices associated with yoga and Buddhism, such as meditation and pranayama, are similar to those taught by Jesus, and that he may have learned these techniques during his travels in the East. It's worth noting that many of the sources Prophet cites are not widely accepted by scholars, and there is no historical evidence to support the idea that Jesus traveled to India or learned spiritual practices from Eastern teachers. However, her book has been influential in some spiritual communities, particularly those that seek to bridge the gap between Eastern and Western spiritual traditions. There are also some traditions and stories within certain religious communities in Kerala that suggest that Jesus may have visited the region. One such tradition is the belief among some members of the Syrian Christian community in Kerala that Saint Thomas, one of the apostles of Jesus, visited India and established a church in Kerala. Some members of this community believe that Jesus himself may have visited India with Saint Thomas. Finally, it's important to note that these theories are largely based on speculation and there is no concrete evidence to support them. While there are some accounts that suggest Jesus may have traveled to India, these accounts are largely anecdotal and have not been substantiated by historical evidence. Thanks for watching.